Hey, if you're a fan of Ozzy Osbourne, especially in the early days of his solo career, I think you'll enjoy this video that I have for you here today. I know for a lot of us, our first introduction to Black Sabbath was from the heavy metal soundtrack, the song Mob Rules. And so our first exposure to Black Sabbath was with Ronnie James Dio as the singer. And we became fans of Dio and Black Sabbath, but didn't understand at the time that there was a Black Sabbath before that. We'd heard the name Ozzy Osbourne, and then we just, over time you start making these connections and realizing, wait a minute, Ozzy was the singer for Black Sabbath, and then of course Iron Man. You discover all this old music. Anyway, it was the early '80s, and I was just, a lot of us were just figuring out. We were coming off a Kiss, and we're starting to figure out all the other hard rock and everything. And so anyway, when the story, Ozzy goes off, he leaves Black Sabbath, and that's a kind of an ugly story how that all happened. Then Ozzy goes and he goes out to start a new band, and the band is going to be called Blizzard of Ozz, and that's what the other guys in the group thought they were signing up for. But the powers that be, and there's a lot of different stories behind this, but the powers that be decided that from a marketing standpoint, they needed to have the Ozzy Osbourne brand front and center on this. And then what we kind of then assumed was that the name of the album was Blizzard of Ozz, but actually that was supposed to be the name of the band. And it's kind of amazing when you look back at this album, especially just the song Crazy Train, the staying power that song has had. And this launched Ozzy into this whole new career. I mean, he'd been big enough with Black Sabbath, then he goes off on his solo, and so many people wrote him off. And then he just amped it up and just became more and more famous over time. It was really kind of incredible. So anyway, what I wanted to read for you here today, one of the things we do a lot on this channel, of course, is we'll go back and we'll find old record reviews, old concert reviews. And in this case, I found something that was really well written, and it's kind of funny, and it actually it's very negative about Ozzy, but it's still entertaining listening to this. Whether you're a fan of Ozzy or not, I still thought this was hilariously funny listening to this person's take on Ozzy and his solo career. And so I think you'll enjoy this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read this for you. This is from the Boston Globe. This is August 12th, 1981. And so to put this in perspective from a timeline standpoint, this was the album that was out at the time that he would be touring on. It was about 2 months later that Diary of a Madman would come out. Anyway, but that gives you an idea of what was happening at the time. So this article is from the Boston Globe, August 12th, 1981, and the title of the article is Once an Oz, Always an Oz. Okay, and it says Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Ozz in concert with Def Leppard at Cape Cod Coliseum Sunday. All right, here we go. I think I've got it. Heavy metal in its classic form is the inverse of the blues. With the blues, pain and loss are liberated, given emotional release. With classic heavy metal, pain and loss are flogged and amplified, and then, most importantly, nullified. A simple equation. How can you care when you can't think? Ozzy Osbourne, ex-lead yowler for Black Sabbath, brought his new juggernaut, Blizzard of Ozz, to the Cape Cod Coliseum Sunday, along with a lot of mescaline dealt in the parking lot outside and the deafening cement mixer sound dealt inside. There was a fair bit of irony dealt throughout the evening. Ozzy's intent, naturally enough, is ultimate macho aggression, but with a charted musical course that predominantly starts, develops, and ends at the same place. We're talking about controlled aggression with highs and lows, not unlike the ones your washing machine runs through during its cycles. I love this. When you find a good writer that just knows how to put those little subtle jabs in there, I love this stuff. It's so much fun. Okay. Still, giving credit where it's due, Ozzy might be smarter than he seems to let on. Example 1. he uses the word polemically in a song. Now this is interesting because when I read that, I thought, wait, what? When does he? And then you realize, and part of this is because you don't always understand what he's saying in his lyrics. So I'm going to show you that, and this is kind of a beat up copy of Blizzard of Ozz, but at least you'll be able to see it. Mr. Crowley, the epilogue of Mr. Crowley. Was it polemically sent? I want to know what you meant. For some reason, I've heard that song how many times before, and I just never understood the word in there. And here's this guy goes, well, at least he used a big word like that, which I thought was just kind of funny. So example 2, he opened the show with I Don't Know, a superbly ironic head knocker that ends with the line, it's up to you, which is about the same do-it-yourself message progressive rocker Peter Gabriel put across a while back. And if you didn't know, Peter Gabriel actually had a song called DIY, Do It Yourself, and it was actually produced by Robert Fripp. Anyway, that would have been back in the late 70s, I think 78. But of course, the volume and sledgehammer drive of the music overwhelms everything, making the impact about anything but taking control for yourself. Neat touch. The true heavy metal attitude toward taking action was later exposed in Ozzy's encore, the old Sabs tune, Iron Man. Nobody wants him, Ozzy yowls. He just stares at the wall. And of course, those are lyrics from the song Iron Man. Right to the point. Predicament and solution all in one. Despite an erroneous image as some satanic worshiper, Ozz looks more like an out-of-work geezer who spent a few years drinking beer. Mostly, Ozz waves the peace sign, grins like the village idiot, and hunches over, clapping his hands like one of those toy monkeys. And if you sift through the lyrics on the album's inner sleeve, Forget Him in Concert, you'll find that, despite a pleasant new number played at Cape Cod called Die High Again, Ozz can be a bit of a fun-loving humanist. From Steal Away, Love Will Flow Like Wine Tonight, from Revelation, Mother, please show the children before it's too late to fight each other. There's no one winning. We must fight all the hate. Okay, let's get back to the question. Is Blizzard of Ozz better than Black Sabbath? And by the way, just listening to all the stuff that we've heard so far, if you saw Ozzy in concert during this particular tour, I'd love to hear about it. Please put that in the notes. What was your experience like watching Ozzy as he kind of set out? And again, we call it Ozzy as a solo artist, but at the time it wasn't supposed to be. So anyway, so let's see here. Okay, so let's get to the big question. Is Blizzard of Ozz better than Black Sabbath? Are day-old leftover burgers better than week-old leftover burgers? Is a 1980 calendar more useful than a 1975 calendar? Would you? And remember, this article is being written in 1981, so anyway, that's important with that line. Would you rather be run over by a train or a steamroller? Fact is, despite certain, dare I say, growth exhibited on the Blizzard of Ozz LP, in concert, Ozz proves that once an Ozz, always an Ozz. Rock and roll is a bludgeoning instrument. Sunday's saving grace, though, was Randy Rhoads, who is by no means a good guitarist, but is also not Black Sabbath's Tony Iommi, whose guitar as an oral torture device drives laboratory mice to suicide. This is so interesting because when you take these things in hindsight, again, this album has staying power now, what, 40 plus years later? What is that? 44 years later, this thing is still, that song, especially Crazy Train alone, still resonates. So this thing had a massive staying power, and Randy Rhoads, in retrospect, and a lot of people knew it at the time, but in retrospect was one of the great guitarists of that era. And here's this guy poo-pooing all of it, looking at Randy Rhoads going, well, he's not as bad as Iommi was, But the truth is, Tony Iommi was fantastic in his own way, and Randy Rhoads. But one thing that's interesting also in here, and I want to give this guy credit for even saying it, is that he used the word, he said, dare I say, growth. Because one of the interesting things that happened with both things, with Black Sabbath when Dio comes in, and then Ozzy hooking up with Randy Rhoads and his new, Blizzard of Ozz band, they both interestingly grew. The musicianship, the music, what came out of them. Now, you don't have to like Ozzy's solo stuff as much as the Black Sabbath stuff, and I love the old Black Sabbath stuff with Ozzy. But you have to realize that from a musician standpoint, there was actual real growth in the music. It changed, it progressed in some ways. Now, you might say it regressed in the output, but the skill set behind it definitely it just increased. Just when you look at this album, when you look at the next album, because Randy Rhoads forced that band to get better, the band that Ozzy was with, and he probably in some ways forced Ozzy to step up his game. And you listen to Geezer Butler, Tony Iommi, they talk about Dio the same way. Bringing him into the band at that point forced them to step up their game. And a lot of times that stuff's needed. You have a band like Black Sabbath that really by the end of that first Ozzy, the first Ozzy era had gotten a little stale. And so when he says growth here, he's right, because sometimes you have to have that. You have to introduce these new elements. You have to force yourself out of that situation that's become stale and force yourself to deal and work with a guy like Randy Rhoads, and you become a better person or a better performer or a better player or a better singer or whatever because of it. And on the other hand, the same thing with Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, having to now have somebody like Dio walk in, where Dio is a lyricist and he plays instruments, which Ozzy never wasn't really involved with that part of it. It forced them to step up their game, and they'll be the first ones to tell you that. You can see it in interviews and their books. They talk about this stuff. Anyway, it's just interesting that he makes that point here. Okay. Whose guitar, it's so funny. Laboratory Mice to Suicide. I love Tony Iommi's guitar playing. I just do. I think he's one of the, I love his guitar playing. Okay. If Blizzard of Ozz is a modern dinosaur of heavy metal, Def Leppard is a cheetah of the same field. Like Iron Maiden, Def Leppard is part of AC/DC-influenced school of British heavy metal. They let it rip. Now, again, to put this in context, this was, I think, a couple of months after High and Dry had come out. So now this person is kind of shifting gears, saying they're talking about Def Leppard and kind of comparing what was happening with Def Leppard at the time, because they were the kind of the new British heavy metal or whatever. I don't know if the word heavy metal is so difficult to use, but they had a very, very intense AC/DC sound, especially on that High and Dry album, for obvious reasons when you understand the production. But okay. AC/DC influenced school of British heavy metal. They let it rip. Def Leppard aren't as dexterous with melody, and they make a point of not breaking new ground, but they do play screaming, tight, driven rock with the requisite crankshaft riffs. Sure, it's bone-crushing bluster, but it's not pretentious bone-crushing bluster, and one must take refuge in pleasures, however qualified. And that's the end of the article. Anyway, I thought you would enjoy that, because again, this guy obviously doesn't like Ozzy, didn't like Black Sabbath, none of this, and he was out to kind of attack it. And do with that whatever you will. But it's interesting still to see somebody from the outside, their view, especially at the time. And especially now, all these years later, when you realize that those things that were happening at that time, that Black Sabbath, their entire career, they are now legends, that whole Ozzy time period. And then the Ozzy, this solo stuff, if you will, when Blizzard of Ozz came out, this now has had staying power for several decades. And interestingly, the Black Sabbath stuff with Dio, same thing. It kind of stuck, and it made a splash, and it continues to resonate even to this day. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I find this stuff so fascinating. If you're not following the channel, please follow the channel. Like the video. I'd love to hear, again, if you saw this concert and if you have any thoughts about any of the stuff that I talked about, especially the stuff related to the growth and the change of what had to happen with this and the kind of impact that these two directions took. When Ozzy went off and did this Blizzard of Ozz, the impact, I mean, who would have ever thought that the name Ozzy Osbourne, back then when people were kind of writing him off, would today really be a household name? I mean, how many people have never heard of him before? It's amazing what ultimately happened with him and with his career and with the music and the fact that this stuff is still around. Anyway, I think it's fascinating. I'd love to get your feedback on that. Follow the channel, like the video, share your thoughts and comments. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.